My name is Olivia Carter. I am 32 years old. People look at my brown eyes and think they see softness. They don't. Let me tell you about my father first, because this story begins and ends with him. Richard Carter built everything from nothing. He started a small logistics company out of a rented garage in Columbus, Ohio, 3 vans, 2 employees, and a man who worked 16 hours a day and never once complained. By the time I was in college, Carter Logistics had contracts with 4 regional distribution companies. By the time I graduated with my MBA from Ohio State, he employed over 120 people and owned a warehouse complex on the east side of the city. My father did not talk about money. He talked about work ethic. About loyalty. About doing what you said you were going to do. He raised 2 children, me, and my brother Derek, older by 4 years, louder by a mile, and possessed of the unshakable confidence that comes from being told your whole life that you are the one who matters. I started working in Dad's company when I was 24. Not as a figurehead. Not as the boss's daughter sitting in a corner office signing papers. I managed operations. Scheduling. Vendor contracts. Driver logistics. Compliance reporting. I was the reason the warehouse ran on time. I was the reason 3 major clients had renewed their contracts 2 years in a row. My father knew it. He told me often, in the quiet way men of his generation expressed pride, a hand on the shoulder, an extra moment of eye contact, and I don't know what I'd do without you, Liv. Derek, meanwhile, had tried 2 businesses of his own. A sports bar that closed after 18 months. A real estate venture that never got off the ground. He came back to Columbus with a polished attitude and a new suit, ready to be welcomed home as the prodigal son. Dad welcomed him. That was the kind of man he was. He never changed his will. And then, at 67 years old, my father had a stroke on a Tuesday morning in March, and by Thursday he was gone. The will was read 10 days after the funeral. I sat in the attorney's office in a black blazer, hands folded in my lap, already knowing something was wrong. I had tried to speak with our family attorney, James Holloway, twice that week. Both times, Derek had been present. Both times, the conversation had shifted to logistics I wasn't responsible for. The will was 4 years old. Written before I had taken over operations. Before the business had tripled in size. Before I had become, in every practical sense, the person holding Carter Logistics together. In it, my father left the business and the family home, the house on Elmwood Drive where we grew up, entirely to Derek, as the eldest child. I received a cash sum and a sentence that read like an afterthought. Derek didn't even try to look sorry. He leaned back in his chair and said, in that casual, entitled voice I had heard my entire life, Dad always knew I was the one who'd carry this forward, Liv. You know how he was. Traditional. Traditional. As though 5 years of my life, 5 years of 7 a.m. starts and vendor calls and spreadsheets and holding that company together with both hands, was just a hobby I'd been indulging. I looked at my brother. I looked at James Holloway, who studied the desk. I looked at the will in my hands. Then I folded it neatly, placed it on the table, picked up my purse, and walked out. I did not say a single word. Everyone who knew me expected a fight. Expected me to lawyer up immediately, to call family friends, to show up at the company that Monday and refuse to leave. Derek had certainly expected that. He'd already prepared a response, already spoken to attorneys about my likely next moves. What he had not prepared for was silence. I disappeared from his orbit entirely. Stopped coming to the office. Stopped responding to family group texts. I moved into a small apartment in Clintonville, enrolled in a 6-month business law course at Columbus State, and began, methodically, without drama, to build something he couldn't see coming. I had spent 5 years learning every inch of Carter Logistics. I knew the clients, the contracts, the drivers, the vendors. I knew which accounts were profitable and which were barely breaking even. I knew where the inefficiencies were buried. And I knew, most importantly, that 3 of the company's biggest clients, Midwest Supply Chain, Hartfield Distributors, and a grocery chain called Fresh Run, had relationships not with Carter Logistics the company, but with me personally. I called each of them. Not to poach. Not yet. Just to stay in touch. Just to have coffee. Just to keep a door slightly open. Meanwhile, I found an attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia Nguyen who specialized in business litigation and contested estates. She looked at the will, looked at my employment history, looked at 5 years of performance records, emails, and documented contributions, and said something I had been waiting to hear. This is challengeable. And even if we don't win on the estate, we can win on something else. The something else was this: I had never signed an employment contract with Carter Logistics. I had worked there for 5 years, managed major accounts, made decisions that grew the business, and had never been formally compensated at a rate that reflected my actual role. Patricia called it unjust enrichment. The law called it a claim. I called it a starting point. I filed the claim 8 months after my father's funeral. Derek received the paperwork on a Wednesday morning and called me for the first time in months, his voice carrying that particular pitch of someone who is angry but trying to sound calm. "Olivia. What is this?" "It's a legal document," I said. "You should have your attorney explain it to you." And I hung up. The next 6 months were not easy. Derek hired aggressive counsel. He told family members I had always been jealous, always been difficult, that our father had made his wishes clear. Some relatives believed him, or pretended to, because it was easier. My Aunt Susan called and asked me, gently, to consider the family's reputation. My cousin Brett sent a long text about how fighting over money wasn't what Richard Carter would have wanted. I responded to none of it. I was busy. I had taken a consulting position with a mid-sized logistics firm in Dublin, Ohio, close enough that my industry knowledge was immediately valuable, far enough that it wasn't a direct conflict. I was good at my job. I am good at every job I have ever done, because I simply do not know how to do things poorly. The clients I had quietly stayed in touch with were watching. Hartfield Distributors, in particular, had noticed that since I left, Carter Logistics had missed 2 delivery windows and lost a compliance certification that I had personally managed for 3 years. Their operations director, a practical man named Greg Sutton, called me in month 4 and asked, with no ambiguity, whether I was planning to start something of my own. I told him I was considering it. He told me to consider it faster. The legal case settled 14 months after it was filed. Derek's lawyers had discovered that Patricia Nguyen was far better at this than they had anticipated. He agreed to a settlement, not the whole business. I hadn't expected it to be. But it was significant. Enough to serve as startup capital. And there was something else in the agreement, a formal written acknowledgement that my contributions to Carter Logistics during my tenure had been substantial and materially impactful. I had wanted that in writing. Not for pride. For proof. I signed on a Friday afternoon in Patricia's conference room, shook hands with everyone, drove home, and opened my laptop. I had already registered the business name 3 weeks earlier, Clearpath Logistics LLC. On Monday morning, I sent formal proposals to Hartfield Distributors, Midwest Supply Chain, and Fresh Run. By Wednesday, I had responses from all 3. By the end of the month, I had signed contracts with 2 of them, the same contracts that had represented nearly 40% of Carter Logistics' annual revenue. I hired 8 people. Several of them were drivers and operations staff who had worked under me at Carter Logistics and had followed everything closely. They didn't need much convincing. Derek found out about Clearpath Logistics the same way most people find out about things they should have seen coming, too late, and from someone else. One of his remaining clients mentioned it in a meeting. Asked if he knew his sister had just picked up the Hartfield account. He hadn't known. He sat in that meeting and kept his face very still, and afterward went back to his office and closed the door. He called me one more time, 6 months after I launched. His voice didn't carry anger this time. It carried something quieter and harder to name. "You took everything," he said. I let a moment pass before I answered. "No," I said. "I built something." "There's a difference." Dad knew the difference. That's actually the whole point. I ended the call, set my phone face down on my desk, and looked out the window of my office, a real office now, in a building I lease, with my name on the door and 12 employees on the payroll and a whiteboard full of next quarter's projections. Outside, it was an ordinary Tuesday in Columbus. Quiet, gray, Midwestern. The kind of day nothing seems to happen on. I turned back to my work. I am 32 years old. Clearpath Logistics recently Clearpath Logistics recently signed its 4th major client. We have expanded to a 2nd city. A regional business journal named me one of the top emerging entrepreneurs in Ohio, a profile that mentioned, briefly, that I had previously worked in a family logistics company before striking out on her own. I didn't correct the journalist. Previously worked in is technically accurate. I keep the magazine on my desk. Not because I need validation. Because I learned something important in the past 3 years that I want to remember. The best revenge is not destruction. Derek still has Carter Logistics. It is smaller now, quieter, struggling in ways it wasn't before, but it is his. He can have it. What I built is entirely my own. No inheritance. No handout. No one's name but mine on the door. My father called me the spine of the family once, in private, when he thought no one was listening. Now everyone is listening. And I never had to raise my voice once.